Right now, what would you take with you if you were forced to leave your home? If you were unsure whether you will ever be able to return to that home, having to spend the rest of your life wishing you had never left.
When my grandfather was 9 years old, he did not have time to think of answers to these questions. He was forcibly removed from his home with his family from Jaffa to Nablus, another city in Palestine, where they found shelter in a mosque in Nablus. After living there for a few years, they realized there was no going back home, and they resettled into a refugee camp in Nablus, where my grandfather got married and raised his children. Meanwhile, in Gaza, my mom was also growing up in an apartment in Gaza as a result of her own parents being forcibly removed from their homes. My grandfather is currently only 1 in 4 million displaced Palestinian refugees. After growing up in refugee camps in Gaza and Nablus, my parents finished most of their high school education in Palestine, and then both got an opportunity to study abroad in a high school in Canada where they met. After finishing high school, they both went on to get their BAs and PhDs from colleges and universities in France and the United States. And after finishing their studies, they decided to move back to Palestine in a city called Ramallah, where I grew up. They had me, my brother, and sister. We all went to a high school in Ramallah called the Ramallah Friends School, and I graduated in May of 2016. After graduating from high school, I decided I want to continue my education at Macalester College, a college at St. Paul, Minnesota in the United States. My name is Nahla Almbaid. I'm a student at Macalester College, and both of my parents are refugees.
I am Bo Kim, excuse me, and I'm Bo Kim, a recent graduate of our college, Macalester. And unlike Nahla's parents, my mother did not grow up in a refugee camp, but rather through political turmoil in Korea and eventually immigrating to the United States. And I consider to have walked a path called privilege as a first-generation citizen of the United States. And it was only until I entered high school in the outskirts of Philadelphia, coincidentally a sister school to Nahla's back in Ramallah, that I started hearing these stories, family stories from friends. And similar to Nahla's parents and grandparents, I began realizing that refugee stories like theirs were far too common, unfortunately. But as a Korean American at the time, who may seem at first very removed and disconnected from the refugee crisis, I still kept asking myself, what is there that I could do? Is there anything that I could do? And what does it mean for me to be trapped in this question of, why do I care? What does it mean for us to care? I began caring because it was a moral, ethical, and humanitarian issue. Between the time I entered high school in 2009 and was ready to graduate in 2013, the total refugee population of 10 million refugees began to rise sharply as a direct and tragic result of the Syrian Arab Republic conflict. By my first year at Macalester, there was 113 people who were displaced by war, violence, and persecution. And by the time I was a junior at my college, and when Nahla was getting ready to enter college, we were facing a tragical moment in history where there are more displaced people now than ever before. Nahla and I began caring, and we cared because we believe that there must be something that we can do to have an impact on the 65.6 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. So we began researching. Most refugees and displaced people are concentrated in the Middle East, West Asia, particularly in Syria today. According to the UNHCR, there are about 5.5 million Syrian refugees that are registered, with the number continuing to rise due to the unending conflict.
Now I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself, were you aware of the extent of this crisis in the Middle East before coming in here today? A group of students here at Macalester no longer wanted to feel hopeless, and specifically a student, now alumna, a Syrian student called Farah al-Haddad, decided to gather students, including Bo and I, to form a group of students who can help with the crisis. We began our work in fall of 2016, and we started to come up with ways in which simple college students can help alleviate this refugee crisis.
And our team quickly realized that there is a specific way for us to be of help by creating equitable access to higher education for these displaced students in this framework of the Syrian refugee crisis. But to get to this conclusion, we had to do various things in addition to just research. On our campus, we led an international roundtable talk on the topic of sustainability in refugee camps, participated in a campus-wide teach-in series where we educated our peers, faculty, and staff. Not only that, but we also created an academic course just to better understand the framework of the historical context and future implications of the crisis. And
even though in the past decade or so, the focus of colleges on accepting international students has gone up, we realized that as a collective, we need to work more closely with colleges and universities to increase their admission of specifically displaced and refugee students. The colleges need to focus their multicultural and internationalism values to attract more and admit more refugee and displaced students and provide them with the help that they need to reach these institutions.
And to give you just a background of Nahla's points, currently over half of all Syria's university students have had to terminate their higher education or studies. And up to 200,000 Syrian youth are currently displaced from their access to a higher education opportunity. This is why it is critical today that partnerships exist with colleges and organizations like the International Institute of Education and JUSUR. The overarching mission of these type of organizations is to connect displaced students with the opportunity for them to continue pursuing higher education. To give you an example, their joint program called the Syrian Consortium particularly works with international admissions programs here in the United States and colleges to bridge the gap when it comes to admitting and finding a Syrian refugee student.
Such programming provides colleges and universities with the unique opportunity to be able to accept and admit and ensure the well-being of displaced and refugee students within their institutions. Up to this point, there is more than 40 colleges and universities worldwide, including our own institution, who have signed on to IIE's Syria Consortium for Higher Education mission, which highlights the growing interest of these colleges and universities and their understanding of the criticalness of this issue. So, what can you do to help? We need you to step in right now to help us with our mission. The only reason I am able to be here today, the only reason I am able to attend this higher education institution is because my parents were provided with the opportunity and the financial aid they needed to go from their refugee camps to go on and attend high school and universities in different parts of the world. And therefore, we believe that there needs to be an expansion of colleges and universities who work together to admit a higher number of specifically displaced and refugee students. We suggest the following framework. First of all, you have to start with gaining administrative approval and procurement of funds to ensure that that the institutions can afford hosting these students. Secondly, there needs to be recruitment and admission of these students to the institutions. And finally, there needs to be a long-term commitment to these students and their well-being within the institutions to ensure their success within their new environment.
And let us bring it back to a full circle. I want you to recall the questions that we asked at the beginning of our talk. What does it mean for someone to be forcibly removed from their home? What does it mean for them to not know whether they will be able to go back to what was so familiar to them? Like Nahla's parents, most refugees never know where they're going to end up, what will happen to them, let alone their families or loved ones. So we believe that it is our responsibility as abled people who have access to resources to retain hope and act upon the needs of local, national, and international communities. And yes, we outlined one way that we can be of help and make an impact on the overarching refugee crisis through higher education. But our call to action reaches farther than that. It can begin with the story. Try listening to each other, your peers, your colleagues, your neighbors, their families. Bring these issues up at your next meeting, businesses, communities, teams, even at your next game. Because we believe that you have a fundamental choice. Whether to pretend that what we shared with you today is irrelevant, to falsely assume that the issue is too massive, or to stay active and involved, to make a positive impact on the members of a community who are displaced throughout the world.
Thank you.